To order. This is meeting number 39 of the Standing Committee on International Trade. Pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Thursday, September 18, 2025, the committee is resuming its study of Canada in the forthcoming CUSMA review, which we are much anticipating, all of us. We have with us today from the Canadian Meat Council, Kyle Larkin, President and Chief Executive Officer. Welcome, Kyle. We all know you very well. We talk meat and eat meat all the time, so it's always great to have you here. From the Canadian Coalition of Aluminum Extruders, Jamie Neal, Chief Financial Officer, Dayshore Aluminum by video conference. Great to see you there, Jim. I'm glad you were able to join us today. White Birch Paper, Guy Trottier, General Manager. Welcome to you all. Mr. Larkin, I invite you to make an opening statement of up to 5 minutes, please.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you, Chair, and thank you to the members of the committee for inviting us today. My name is Kyle Larkin. I am the President and CEO of the Canadian Meat Council, also known as the CMC. The CMC is the voice of Canada's federally licensed meat industry and the largest component of Canada's food processing sector, with annual sales exceeding $32 billion a year and supporting nearly 300,000 jobs across the country. Our members process over 90% of Canada's meat, including beef, pork, veal, lamb, and bison, supplying Canadian families in more than 90 export markets with safe, traceable, and high-quality protein. The Canadian red meat sector is diverse, encompassing large multinational operations and many small and medium-sized enterprises that form the backbone of rural Canada. We appreciate the invitation today to speak on the Canada-United States-Mexico agreement, as our largest customers can be found in both countries. CUSMA and NAFTA before it have made our meat and agri-food supply chains highly integrated. The Free Trade Pact has also benefited the meat processing sectors in all three countries, allowing them to competitively trade amongst each other and export to high-value markets around the world. As you may know, Canada's meat processing sector is highly dependent on international markets. Each year, we export around 65% of the pork we produce and 50% of the beef. This amounts to over $10 billion in exports of meat products every year, with the United States and Mexico accounting for the majority of those exports. The U.S. in particular accounts for $4.2 billion in exports of Canadian beef and $1.5 billion in exports of Canadian pork, for a total of $5.7 billion. In return, the U.S. sends $2.2 billion of meat products to Canada each year. Not only does this two-way trade benefit Canadian producers and processors, but it also benefits American ones. For example, our sister association in the United States, the American Meat Institute, notes that exports to Canada and Mexico of American meat products added $91 in value per cattle head and $28 per market hog. Mexico is also an important and growing market for Canadian meat. It is our third largest market for Canadian beef, with annual exports of $272 million in 2025, a growth of over 10% in 1 year. For Canadian pork, Mexico represents our fourth largest market, accounting for $371 million in exports last year, a growth of over 17% in 1 year. The political turmoil caused by the American administration has opened the door for Canadian meat processors and exporters. During my participation in the Team Canada trade mission in Mexico, I was able to experience firsthand the potential growth opportunities and demand for Canadian beef and pork. Due to this high volume of exports, the continuance of CUSMA is of the utmost importance to the Canadian meat processing sector. Thankfully, all three of our country's agri-food sectors are aligned on calling for a full 16-year renewal of the agreement as it stands. At the Canadian Meat Council, we continue to work closely with our sister organizations in the United States and Mexico in advocating to our leaders to uphold the agreement. In fact, I will be in Washington, D.C. next week to meet with members of Congress, senators, and officials from the U.S. administration, as well as the organization named the Agricultural Coalition for the USMCA, to highlight the cross-border economic benefits of the agreement. At the same time as we advocate for CUSMA, we must also ensure that we remain competitive at home here in Canada. That's why the CMC continues to advocate for regulatory harmonization with the United States. This includes aligning our enhanced feed ban program with the U.S. standards to eliminate unnecessary compliance costs. This regulatory change alone could save the processing sector $25 million a year. It also includes aligning our defatted beef regulations, which would allow the Canadian sector to extrapolate the same amount of ground beef from trimmings as the American sector does. Both regulatory changes would allow us to remain competitive while supporting food affordability here in Canada. We must also continue to monitor potentially harmful policies both in the U.S. and Mexico, which could limit cross-border trade, including mandatory country of origin labeling known as MCOOL and inspection inconsistencies. Finally, the high integration between the agri-food sectors in Canada, the United States, and Mexico is a strength for our negotiators. CUSMA and NAFTA before it have supported the cross-border trade of agri-food products, ensuring food affordability, food security, and North American food sovereignty. It is paramount that CUSMA continues in its entirety. This remains the #1 priority for Canada's red meat processing sector. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Mr. Larkin. Mr. Neal, for up to 5 minutes, please.
Good morning, Chair and members of the committee. My name is Jamie Neal. I am the interim president and CFO at Dashcore Aluminum. I'm here today speaking to you on behalf of the Canadian Aluminum Extruders Coalition. We represent about 90% of the aluminum extrusion capacity in Canada. 1 year ago, we directly employed 4,000 Canadians. Today, we have lost 500 jobs and employ around 3,500 Canadians across this great country. If we do not act, we will lose another 500 to 1,000 jobs this year, and businesses will begin to close in 2 to 3 years. Aluminum extrusions support another 100,000 jobs in SMEs across many industries in this country. Our companies have been operating in Canada for decades. These are not short-term businesses. They are Canadian manufacturers with long histories, skilled workers, large investments in equipment, and deep knowledge that would be very hard to replace if lost. Canadian aluminum extruders buy raw aluminum, often from Quebec, and turn into shapes and parts that other industries need. These products are used in things like vehicles, rail, buildings, solar panels, data centers, aerospace, defense, and many other applications. We are the link between Canadian raw aluminum production in Quebec and the finished products that Canada wants to build. This link is now under serious pressure. There are 3 major problems that are happening at the same time. The first problem is the loss of the U.S. market. The United States has historically accounted for 40% of Canadian extrusion productions. Section 232 tariffs have made the market much harder to access. Even more concerning, the tariff is now being applied to the full value of the product, not just the aluminum itself. This means that the tariff is being applied to Canadian labor, Canadian overhead, Canadian fabrication, Canadian finishing, and other Canadian value-added manufacturing. This is a major problem. If that continues, we believe extrusion exports to the United States will fall to 0. The second problem is the Canadian market is also smaller than it once was. We're down about 15% from the 2023 peak for aluminum extrusion consumption in Canada, largely because of slower economies and lower construction activity. We recognize that the government policies, like the Buy Canada Act, will help over time, and we support these efforts. But those projects often take years to reach manufacturers like us, and they do not solve the immediate issue. The third problem is surging imports into Canada. As other countries also lose access to the U.S. market, they're looking for places to sell their aluminum extrusions, and Canada has become one of those places. We see large increases in imports from countries like Vietnam, Turkey, Thailand, the UAE, Malaysia, and many others. This is not sustainable. We're also concerned about unfair trade practices and products being moved through third-party countries to avoid trade rules. We have heard from industry insiders that Russian aluminum is flowing through other countries like Turkey and then entering Canada ultimately as finished extrusions. This matters because Canadian producers follow the rules. We employ Canadians, we invest here, we buy Canadian aluminum, we pay Canadian wages, but we are being asked to compete in a market that's becoming increasingly unfair. There is also an issue with U.S. imports into Canada. We have a 25% counter tariff on U.S. aluminum extrusions, but that's been largely under remission. We face barriers entering the U.S. marketplace, but they face no barriers entering the Canadian market. This creates an imbalance. Chair, if Canada loses its aluminum extrusion industry, the damage will not stop with our companies. Quebec aluminum producers lose an important Canadian customer, downstream manufacturers lose reliable local supply, communities across Canada lose skilled manufacturing jobs, and Canada becomes more dependent on foreign suppliers for products that are important to our sovereignty. The reality is simple. If this part of the supply chain disappears, others will likely follow. We're asking for urgent help. First, Canada must restore fair access to the US marketplace. On Tuesday, we met with Janice Charette when we were in Ottawa as a group, and we are encouraged by her knowledge on our industry and the impact of the revised 232 application. We believe that she will fight for our industry to have more fair access to the US market. Second, Canada must protect domestic markets from import surges. We believe that tariff rate quotas or TRQs that protect the steel industry would help our industry. The US closing their doors to low-cost imports cannot leave Canada as the landing place for that material. Third, Canada needs stronger import monitoring and enforcement so that we can better track aluminum products coming in and prevent circumvention, dumping, and unfair trade. We have a standing CITT trade case against China that began in 2008 and was recently renewed for 5 more years. We know that Chinese metal is still making its way through other low-cost regions into Canada, but we do not have the enforcement available to catch this today. Our industry is not asking to avoid competition. We're asking for a fair chance to survive and compete. We have the people, we have the equipment, we have the experience, we have the plants, and we have the ability to support the Canadian economy. But we need markets to sell into. We're asking this committee and government to treat this as urgent. Thank you, and I welcome questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Trottier, please, for 5 minutes.
Good morning. My name is Guy Trottier. I'm the general manager of a pulp and paper mill located in Quebec City. We're right next to the Chateau Frontenac. So we're owned by White Birch Paper. This mill has been in operation since 1927, so 99 years of operation. I've had the privilege to be involved with the company for over 35 years. So our business was formerly steered toward newsprint manufacturing with products sold worldwide. India was a major customer for products, but has completely faded away in the last few years as we have observed change in business relations between countries. With the decline in demand for newsprint, both locally and internationally, our production site has engaged in a strong diversification effort to reposition our production line. We now have 3 niche segments: high brightness paper, recycled kraft, and recycled paperboard. Our most recent project involved converting machine 1 from newsprint to recycled kraft paper. We were pursuing several goals in this conversion. We wanted to reduce our consumption of wood chips. The increased tariff on lumber, they have made Quebec's wood chip less available and more costly. The second thing we were pursuing is to steer our production toward products with increasing demand versus newsprint, and to position our manufacturing site away from mega producers of commodity products. And we also wanted to become a large recycling center and to bring plastic substitution replacement solution to the market. We successfully started this new operation. A few months after startup, at the beginning of 2025, the threat of tariff emerged in the United States, and our products were naturally destined. The destination was to 90% USA originally, but this had us revise our position and steer sales differently. Nevertheless, if the tariff had been imposed at this critical point in time, which is early 2025, it would potentially have ruined all our efforts toward this project. We now have diversified our product portfolio and fully ramped up production and sales, a success that came with a massive internal effort by our team. So this project was initially presented in 2022, benefited from the electricity rebate program from the Quebec Ministry of Finance. That was a strong tailwind that allowed us to reduce the risk of the project and come up with an attractive return on investment. The electricity rebate program came to an end at the end of 2025. That's really important to mention. It now makes it difficult to bring additional projects to life in light of this. Our mill has presented a new project aiming at consolidating the future of our production site. We're now looking for ways to support this new effort. Over the last 7 years, we've had the opportunity to visit a few dozen pulp and paper production sites around the world, And right now, China has become the largest producer. It used to be the United States. Now it really is China, and United States being the second. Worldwide, what we're witnessing is large investment in new manufacturing sites. We're also seeing massive upgrades of existing ones. Mills in Quebec and Canada that previously benefited from abundant wood chips supply and energy sources, they're now competing against really big machines, and we are basically trailing behind in this industry right now. The worldwide competition is increasingly fierce. The world is changing. The way the country do business together has changed as well. The big question now becomes, how do we work together to provide future generation with an opportunity to continue manufacturing operation in this new environment? Thank you.
Thank you all very much. Thank you, Mr. Trottier. It was a very informative presentation. On to Mr. Genero, please, for 6 minutes. Welcome to the committee today.
Merci, Madame la Présidente. Merci à tous les témoins. Merci à mes...
Thank you, Madam Speaker. Thank you to my colleagues. Thank you for inviting me today. And thank you to our witnesses. I would like to say hello from Stephanie Poitreau to Mr. Larkin. They are major pork producers in my riding, and they are highly esteemed in the work that they do, and many jobs are provided in our riding from them. So, Mr. Trottier, I would like to begin by asking you some questions. I'm from Rivière-du-Loup, and you're at the Quebec City mill. So you're not affiliated with the Rivière-du-Loup mill, as I've understood, but it is still part of your business sector. Your business, unfortunately, had to close its doors because all of your different entities, if I've understood correctly, are independent. And as you were saying, dozens have had to close their doors, and many of them have been around for 60 years. So what are the biggest difficulties that you experienced in Rivière-du-Loup? Because I know that you were considering changing the machinery as you did in Quebec City. Why was that not possible? Can you give further detail? So, of course, my personal file was always the Quebec City mill, but I still have a long history in pulp and paper. So I was able to keep an eye on what was happening in Rivière-du-Loup. The Rivière-du-Loup mill was highly centered on exportation to India. And as I mentioned in my opening remarks, India progressively decreased its requests for purchases to Canada. We saw that very substantially over recent years. And I observed things about the way India did business with us. India would send us requests, but they would also set the price. So it was a very unique way of doing business. They would set the price on their request, and of course that price would decrease continuously until the point when people in Canada said, well, we're not really interested in filling that order. And this was a way that India withdrew itself from Canada's market in sort of a strategic way. And were we in competition with China in that context? Because China and India are in close proximity. Well, when it comes to pulp and paper, currently Russia, China, and India are working together. And this has been very decisive in past years. We saw a number of mills in Eastern Canada who were used to working with China and India completely end their exports. And if I understand, 60 to 70% of their production was destined for India. Can you tell me about the way you currently view the relationship between Canada and the United States, in particular concerning softwood lumber and everything related to it, wood chips that you require to produce paper, etc.? I know who purchased the Rivière-du-Loup mill. It was Lebel Group. And I have recently had discussions with them, with Frédéric, and they said that the last 10% that the United States government's added on was something that really did not help Canada's industry at the present time, because it allows Europe to deliver wood to the United States at a lower price than we in Canada are able to do, even though we're 5 hours drive away from the United States. It's hard to believe. So, can you talk about the way that you see the Canadian government working with the United States? Do you think Canada is acting to the detriment of the industry? When it comes to softwood lumber, what we see is that the availability of wood chips, we call them byproducts of softwood lumber. So it is difficult at the current time to have access to wood chips at a good price in Quebec. We have a mill at Masson, very close to Gatineau. And what that mill has started doing is to purchase wood chips from Ontario. Why? Because it's not available in Quebec at a good price. So they are able to procure their wood chips, but it has to come from Ontario. And what are we seeing? We're seeing that the number of softwood lumber producers in Quebec is on a downturn. Mr. Généreux, do you believe that the Canadian government's approach should be different? This morning I saw that Mexico and the United States have begun negotiations. They had already begun them earlier, but they have now reached a more important round, I would say. But when it comes to Canada, we haven't seen such progress. So do you think that we should force the hand in negotiations more than we're currently doing? That's not really my area of expertise. So I wouldn't be able to answer that with any detail.
25 seconds remaining, sir.
On se fait
20
voler du
seconds.
temps ici aussi, là. C'est pas drôle, là, non. On se fait des farces.
That's not much time at all. Well, thank you very much. Thank you for your testimony.
Mr. Hassey, please.
Thank
6
you,
minutes.
Madam Chair. Thank you also to the three witnesses. I found your opening remarks very comprehensive and informative, so grateful for that. Now, if I could start off with the Meat Council, Mr. Larkin, allow me first of all to say thank you for all the energy you are putting into the work that you're doing. You're here today. I saw you in Mexico during the Canada Trade Mission. You're off to Washington pretty soon. So you have a very good perspective on the overall industry in all three of the CUSMA countries. Just for the benefit of all of us, could you tell us how integrated the industry is between the three countries?
Yeah, great question. And I'll give you an example on the cattle side, which I'm sure you've heard from our friends at the Canadian Cattle Association, where you can have the cattle that's born and raised in let's say, Alberta, Canada, moved over to the U.S. for fattening and finishing, and then moved back over to Canada for processing by one of the companies that I would represent. So highly integrated on the cattle side, equally integrated on the pork side as well. The processors on both sides of the border and in Mexico as well work fairly closely together, just as our organizations do as well. The Canadian Meat Council actually has a memorandum of understanding with the American Meat Institute and with the Mexican organization called Come Carne. So, and all three of our organizations, and the premise of the MOU is to work together on CUSMA and push for a flat renewal of the agreement.
Now, you also touched on the issue of the need for harmonization. So what are some of those non-tariff barriers that, in your opinion, could benefit from greater harmonization between the three countries?
Yeah, so there's really two regulatory pieces that we're missing here in Canada, where our American counterparts are more competitive within the U.S. and internationally in terms of extrapolating more meat from cattle specifically than we can here in Canada, and it actually costs our beef processors a significant amount of money every year. Number one is specified risk material, enhanced feed ban. It has two different names depending on who you're speaking to. This originated from when we had BSC, the foreign animal disease here in Canada about 20 years ago. The U.S. also brought in regulatory changes to deal with that at that time, but they have moved forward and moved past those regulatory changes to allow beef processors in the U.S. to derive more meat off the carcass of cattle, specifically for pet food. And so we're not there yet. We've got good signals from the government of Canada that we'll get there likely by the end of the year, but there's still some work to be done. The issue that's more new per se is defatted meat. And so in the US for about 5+ years, they have been able to use this new innovation, this extrapolation process, which takes the lean trim, the fat from the cow, puts it in an extrapolation process to extrapolate more ground beef out of the carcass and out of those lean trimmings. Here in Canada, we are not allowed to use that extrapolation process, the ground beef taken out of it, and mix it with the ground beef that we deliver to Canadians. But we are, and this is the crazy part, we are allowed to extrapolate that ground beef, export it to the US for them to use. So we're allowed to export it, but we're not allowed to use it here in Canada. And so that's why we're working with the CFIA to try to get our regulations updated here on defatted beef so we can use this new innovation, which would allow us to get more ground beef from the cattle supply we already have here in Canada, which from our economic impact study shows that it could lower the price of ground beef at the store shelf by over 5%. So there's a real benefit here to the affordability for Canadians.
Okay. And as a concluding question, you said you're working with the CFIA. How long have you been working on this specific project, if you will?
The first project on specified risk material, it's been 5+ years. So we're glad to see that we're finally at the finish line. On the defatted beef submission, we just put it in 2 months ago. So we're currently working with our CFIA officials to get it past the finish line. But we're really looking for those regulations to be updated by the end of the year on defatted meats. It is a new process. It's a new innovation for at least us here in Canada. But as I said, it's been around for 5+ years in the U.S. and beef processors in that country have been enjoying that process for quite some time.
Understood. Thank you so much for that. Now, if I could go to the representative from the aluminum sector. I was wondering, thank you again for your opening remarks. You did touch on some of the pressures you're facing from imports of aluminum. Could you elaborate on that so we all have a much better sense and a much better picture of the pressures that your sector is facing?
Certainly, and thank you for the question. If we look at 2023 and 2024 as averages pre-tariff regime, we look at countries like Malaysia and Turkey. Last year, they brought in 40 to 50% more metal than they brought into the country in 23 and 24. This year alone, in early 2026, the United States has actually seen an increase of imports by 10%, or $3 million per month as an average increase. These are numbers that we find challenging to compete with. Oftentimes, the folks that are importing from offshore can bring in a fully formed extrusion cheaper than I can buy a raw aluminum log from Quebec. It makes it very challenging to compete in this space when they are undercutting our market from a raw perspective.
And the remedy to that would be?
We believe that something similar to what steel has received, tariff rate quotas that would benchmark averages for 2023 or 2024. The steel TRQs have specified rates for market economies, which is 75% of the historic values, and non-market economies, which is 20% of the historic values, and then tariff rates above that.
Thank you very much. Sorry, Mr. Hess, your time is up. Mr. Duchesne, welcome to the committee today.
Thank you, Madam Chair. I'm very pleased to be with you. Thank you to our witnesses. I'll begin questioning Mr. Neal because Quebec's primary aluminum sector makes up 80% of Canada's overall production. Mr. Neal, could you speak to us about the impact in Quebec currently of the tariffs? Can you talk to us in terms of job losses?
So overall, as an industry, we've lost 500 jobs this year since the tariffs came into place. As a group, we're starting to assess the new impact of the Section 232 tariffs, where it's now on the full value of the extrusion, so therefore tariffing our labor. We believe that we'll lose another 500 to 1,000 jobs this year alone from the 3,500 that we sit at today. Where we look at from a Quebec perspective is the raw producers have a global product. They have a comparative advantage on energy. And when you're smelting and casting the raw log, the lowest cost of energy will win that business. Our businesses, where we take that log and push it through a press and out comes a long shape that we cut, manufacture, color, etc., competes regionally. About 500 miles, 800 kilometers is the circle that we draw around our facilities where we would compete. Now, the folks that bring material in from Malaysia, Turkey, Vietnam, they're bringing it in at such a low cost that's 30 or 40% lower than what we can produce it for in Canada, that we don't have a comparative advantage on labor versus countries like that. We don't have a comparative regulatory environment versus countries like that. And so they're able to undercut us and impact our jobs in Canada.
So I take it that job losses are mainly being felt in Quebec?
It's all across Canada. So a colleague that I was with Monday and Tuesday in Ottawa from Vancouver has laid off 50% of their workforce. We have a 10% reduction in our workforce in southwestern Ontario. Metro Canada has had layoffs in Quebec. It's felt across our industry, which is across Canada.
D'entreprises qui devront.
So do you think businesses will have to close their doors if nothing is done?
That's the trajectory that we are on over the next 2 to 3 years, where businesses will close or businesses will move to the United States. Our business, we have a sister facility in Eastern Kentucky. We are adding shifts at that facility because the demand is being driven to the US while we cut shifts in Canada. Producers like us that only have Canadian facilities, like the colleague I mentioned in Vancouver, are looking to acquire facilities in the US because that's where production is being driven. Other colleagues in Ontario are looking to greenfield facilities in the US because that is where investment is being driven.
Est-ce que vous voyez là, comme fermeture ou délocalisation d'ici 2-3 ans?
So when you talk about the next 2 to 3 years, how many closures do you think will happen? How many businesses do you think we will lose in Canada?
There are 10 members of our coalition, 10 companies that do exactly what we do. The losses depend on company-specific products that they manufacture. Some of us are heavier into the auto space. Some of us are heavier into the architectural space or the building space. And as those markets go, or as those markets are eaten up by offshore imports, those businesses will either lose shifts or close or move facilities south of the border.
Environ 10 compagnies là, qui seraient menacées d'ici 2-3 ans.
So about 10 companies in the next 2 to 3 years. How many jobs does that mean?
So our industry currently employs 3,500 direct employees across the country. We support over 100,000 other jobs in the SME sector that take our products and manufacture them into other items, whether it's
Yeah, just hold on, Mr. Neal. We've got a connection problem.
so.
Okay. Mr. Neal, if you could please continue now.
Sorry. So we currently have 3,500 direct employees within Canada in our industry. However, we support nearly 100,000 or more than 100,000 jobs in other SMEs that take our products and further manufacture them, whether that's in rail systems like Bombardier Alstom, whether that's in auto industries that are supported up and down through Tier 1 sourcing in Canada, or whether that's architectural space. There's a vast utilization of our product across many industries. And so our 3,500 direct jobs may be the canary in the coal mine, and we may go first, but the hundreds of thousands of jobs that sit under us in the supply chain are likely to move as well and follow where the extrusions and the upstream manufacturing is done.
Le secteur aluminium est visé là, par une plainte de dumping et
There's also a dumping complaint regarding the aluminum sector, and there was talk about Canada submitting a complaint to the United States. Can you comment on that?
We see challenges of low-cost regions importing materials into Canada. We've had a CITT case that stood against China, but we know they are likely transshipping through other countries like Malaysia, Vietnam, Thailand. We don't have the enforcement capability to check mill finish or mill certs on all those products that enter our country. I foresee there being challenges when Janice sits down across from the folks to negotiate CUSMA 2.0, and they see surging imports into Canada from low-cost regions, and that they might believe that Canada is a source to transship through into the US for these countries. We need to close that back door, and we need to get back to normalized levels like we had in 2023 and 2024 for imports.
Merci.
Thank you very much. Mr. Grelot for 5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you,
Bonjour.
Madam Chair. Good day to our guests. I'll begin with Mr. Larkin from the Canadian Meat Council. Mr. Larkin, how important are predictability and stability for CITA for our Canadian producers?
In Quebec, just south of Montreal, that has a plant in that area and then a plant also in the U.S. They're one of the largest veal manufacturers in the world. And I can tell you that there are concerns about the uncertainty between their business in Canada and their business in the U.S. I have another member in Quebec, a pork processor, who is actually considering moving his entire business, his entire facility from Quebec to the United States because of the current uncertainty. I hear from that particular member almost on a weekly basis with concerns about the stability of CUSMA and the uncertainty caused by the American administration. So there are real impacts on jobs and real impacts on economics.
Quel va être l'impact sur les jobs, comme vous dites?
And can you talk to us about impacts on jobs?
Facility obviously has a different employment structure and in different job categories. Thankfully, agri-food products remain USMCA compliant and therefore tariff-free. And so that has allowed the pork processors and the beef processors to continue employing the suite of employees that they have had before this turmoil joined us. But as we look towards the future, if the uncertainty continues, and especially if we see any kind of tariffs on agri-food products, including meat products, that's where we're going to probably see some job cuts.
On va faire un examen. On est en train de faire l'examen bientôt.
So soon we will be reviewing CUSMA, and we've just come back from Brazil and Argentina, where we worked on a Mercosur, another agreement. Brazil and Argentina want a higher market share for poultry and beef. If we were to open that door, would that come into play for the CUSMA negotiations? Would it be dangerous to open the door to Mercosur in a way that could have a direct impact on CUSMA?
Answer to your question. Just 2 weeks ago, Bloomberg reported that President Trump was going to open the doors and allow all meat coming into the U.S. tariff-free. He heard from his colleagues in the Republican Party on Capitol Hill, and a day later, Bloomberg reported that they were rolling back that program and that they weren't going to do that. So there's a lot of sensitivity in the U.S., just like there's sensitivity in Canada regarding food affordability, meat affordability. But that doesn't mean that we need to carve out and really impact our beef sector. We have a choice here in Canada to either bring in cheap imports or have a strong, growing beef sector, and that includes our ranchers, our farmers, our processors. In 2025, we imported about 36,000 tons of beef from Mercosur countries. About 20,000 of that tons came in at a tariff of 26.5%. Just to show you how competitive beef from places like Brazil and Argentina can be. So we're working fairly closely with our chief trade negotiator to ensure that if an agreement is signed with Mercosur, we don't sacrifice beef for other sectors. Instead, we create very specific tariff rate quotas specifically for lean trim, as we do have a demand for lean trim here in Canada to produce extra lean and lean ground beef. Canadians have an insatiable appetite for lean ground beef, but we cannot allow more primals to come into Canada, so your tenderloins, your strip loins, etc. We have a hard red line on that, and we'll continue to have that.
Merci pour votre réponse.
Thank you for your answer. Are there opportunities in the renegotiation that we could find to better harmonize our trade with the United States and Mexico? Are there any suggestions you have for us for how we could help you?
First of all, I would say the way that CUSMA is currently built, if it is just flatly renewed as it is currently created, we are more than content to have that, especially if it's a 16-year renewal, which is what our industry and the American industry, agri-food industries are pushing for. Are there areas that could be improved? Absolutely. One I would highlight is the regulatory, the RCC, the Regulatory Cooperation Council. We need to get that back online. We need to get that work recommencing. There's a lot of regulatory harmonization that we can have between Canada and the U.S. As I look towards Mexico, there is a role for the CFIA to play and the Government of Canada to play to ensure that our inspection systems have equivalency and that there's an inspection consistency. Because sometimes what we see in Mexico is we'll send beef products or pork products down. One inspector decides one way and another Mexican inspector decides a different way. And that has a real impact when our companies are spending dollars to export product down to Mexico just for it to be sent back to Canada. And we literally had this case about 2 months ago from beef from Manitoba that was sent down to Mexico, reached the border, and then had to be sent back because of inspection inconsistencies.
Thank you.
Madame Lapointe.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. Welcome to our witnesses. This has been very interesting. Mr. Trottier, I believe that you're in Steve Lavoie's riding. He is our colleague who was unable to be here today because he had a committee conflict. He also sits on the Finance Committee, so he wanted me to send you his regrets. What I understand from our discussions is that currently the Quebec government has not renewed certain programs for you, and this leaves you in a difficult financial situation. How could the federal government compensate in partnership with the provincial government in order to help you get through this hardship? So we're talking about a strategic response fund and measures for businesses. Our company has met representatives from the federal government already, and constructive conversations are already underway. As you know, the Quebec government is in a transition period as Mr. Legault has stepped down. And there was a program that was funding up to 40% of our electricity, which we need in our industry. We consume extremely high amounts of electricity, so it was very useful to us to have such a program to cut our electricity costs. So, of course, industry as well globally is modernizing and becoming more competitive. And when it comes to the products that we produce and the modernization of our facilities, we absolutely must continue in that vein. We must continue to improve, because if we do not, then our competitors will easily overtake us, and that's currently what we're observing. Thank you. So we need to strengthen competitiveness of your businesses and other businesses like yours across Canada, and that would be through the strategic fund, the federal strategic fund. Yes, among other measures. Okay. I have a question for aluminum extruders, Mr. Mills. Mr. Neal, earlier you mentioned the automotive sector, the aerospace sector. I'm sure you know Rofust, the company?
We do not supply into them, but we may have colleagues that do.
Okay.
So that's in my writing. They produce aluminum. And it seems to me that the automobile and the aerospace sectors are doing well. Earlier, you mentioned dumping from Thailand, Vietnam, Turkey, and Malaysia. Which sectors are these companies or are these countries dumping into? The ones that you mentioned earlier?
Automotive is tougher to dump into because there's stricter regulations, there's higher barriers to entry, and the tier ones that sit in Canada today all require specific certifications to supply into the automotive industry. So that will be one of the last industries that we'll see dumping. It's more of the standard shapes, the racking systems, the architectural materials, building supplies that are easier to dump into those spaces. So think the transition between your hardwood flooring and your tile flooring, or the finishing piece that goes beside your backsplash in your kitchen.
OK. Parce que tantôt, vous disiez qu'il y avait des mises à pied. Moi, je peux juste vous dire que Rofust, qui font...
So I can tell you that Rofust, which make aluminum parts for cars, they're expanding. It's really hard to put a plan in place. It's very expensive. So they're focusing on entry-level pieces that are easier to produce. So regarding aluminum, the countries that are dumping, where are they sourcing their aluminum from originally?
So primary production around the world is centered in four places. China is the biggest primary producer. The Middle East, including the UAE, is a primary producer. Turkey is a primary producer, and Quebec. The metal comes from those places because that is the lowest cost access to energy, very energy intensive to take alumina, melt it down into logs that is then shipped around the world. That's where the raw materials exist.
Merci. Monsieur Larkin, vous avez parlé tantôt du
Thank
veau.
you. Mr. Larkin, earlier you talked about veal. And so where is the abattoir for veal located?
Je pensais qu'il était à Terrebonne.
Before I thought it was in Terrebonne. No, I believe it's just north of Montreal.
OK,
Vous êtes
mais,
là en juillet.
OK, juste...
I visited there in July.
Real quick.
Oui, vous dites que si on
So
importe...
regarding
ça peut-
ground beef, you said that if we import, it can decrease by 5% ground beef. I would tell you that Canadian consumers would really want beef to decrease in price by even more than 5%.
Madame Lapointe. And really what's impacting the price of ground beef right now is the low cattle supply we have here in Canada. It's the lowest we've had in decades. I know our friends in farming and ranching are working to grow the herd, and we actually had a 2.5% growth in the herd last year. The U.S. had a negative percent in growing the herd. The first time actually in a while that Canada is leading the way in growing the herd and not the Americans. So there's some more work to be done over the next year, 2 years, 3 years in terms of growing the herd. But as we grow the herd, the price of beef will come down. Just the last point on beef processors are actually losing $200, $300 a head right now because of how high the price of cattle has been for the past 4 years. I have beef processing members in Manitoba, in Shawinigan, Quebec, in Charlottetown, PEI, that are actually cutting back on shifts right now and cutting back on work because they just can't afford to process more beef.
Okay,
Merci.
thank you very much.
Merci.
Mr. Duchesne, for 2.5 minutes, please.
Madame la Présidente, Monsieur Larkin.
Thank
vous
you,
mention-
Madam Chair. Mr. Larkin, you mentioned that you will be traveling to the United States very soon and that you also travel there regularly. What do you hear from your American counterparts regarding this idea that there is a common interest for us to renew the CUSMA agreement?
Especially Republican members of Congress and senators on the ground. The message, I would say, over the past 12 months has shifted a bit. The message 12 months ago was we're giving a long leash to President Trump and we're allowing the administration to do what they need to do on the tariff front. Last time I was there, which was in November, the message had changed, that I think the leash had shortened a bit, and that especially Republican members of Congress were getting a little more bullish on with the administration and on promoting the USMCA. And we actually saw a letter come out in November from bipartisan members of Congress, from Democrats and Republicans, sent to the White House that and their ask to the White House was for a flat renewal of the USMCA for 16 years. So we have a lot of allies on Capitol Hill in both parties, and so I expect we'll have very positive meetings next week as we meet with these folks. And when I meet with our stakeholders on the ground, so the meat institutes and the other agri-food associations in Washington D.C., their message again is a flat renewal of the 16 years of the USMCA. They're getting positive messages from the White House, from the Trump administration, that agri-food, as we've seen over the past 12 to 18 months, has very much been carved out of the tariff conversation. I think there's a clear recognition by the administration, by the Secretary of Agriculture as well, that tariffing food increases the cost at the grocery store, and that's why we saw them backtrack on tariffs on things like bananas, coffee, etc. All agri-food continues to be USMCA or CUSMA compliant. So there's a strength there, as I said in my opening remarks, for our negotiators to really lean on the agri-food sector. We supply the majority of fertilizer to the U.S. So there's a real strength in that relationship that we need to continue taking advantage of.
20 seconds remaining, sir.
Oui. Peut-être, Monsieur Neal.
Perhaps a question to you, Mr. Neal. The counter tariffs, Canadian counter tariffs, in your opinion, is the income that we're generating from that being put to good use?
we are not currently enforcing the counter tariffs. They've been under remission from the start. And so on aluminum products, they are able to cross from the US into Canada under the HS codes that we participate in, 7604, 7608, tariff free into Canada if they're being used in further manufacturing. All aluminum extrusions are effectively used in further manufacturing. And so they come in completely tariff free from the US. So we've seen no benefit of keeping product out of Canada, and we've also seen no benefit of revenue generated that could be further dispersed to the industry.
Thank you very much. Mr. Chambers for 5 minutes, please.
Mr. Larkin, welcome back to committee. Congratulations. I understand you have a newborn at home, potential future challenger to Mr. Nakvi's seat, I think, here in Ottawa. But congratulations. It's a special thing, so congratulations. I was listening to your testimony both today but also previous appearances where you suggest that CUSMA is essential to kind of a well-functioning and integrated supply chain. Is that still your position?
Yes, absolutely. Our largest customer is the U.S. There's a lot of work being done right now on trade diversification, including by the industry, trying to find customers in other places globally. But the U.S. is our current largest customer and will continue to be our largest customer for the vast foreseeable future.
Right. So your position would be that a successful negotiation and conclusion to the current or upcoming CUSMA negotiations would be essential for your members. Right. And how should we take the observation that Mexico is seemingly having ongoing and formal discussions in advance of this CUSMA deadline? How do you interpret the fact that Mexico is, in fact, having these discussions and it does not appear that Canada is? Are you concerned, or do you think we should be at the table, or how do you read into that fact?
Concerned, yes or no. Concerned because we need to get the deal done with the U.S. and Mexico. The industry, a lot of the industry, is based off the relationship we have with both countries. No, because I'm also a believer that we need to get the best deal possible at the table. We can't rush things. My worry for our friends in Mexico is they may be rushing into things and getting a deal that may not be beneficial to their own country. I mean, we saw the same thing happen with our friends in the European Union or in the United Kingdom. That's not the direction we want to go. We want to ensure that the agreement, first of all, remains the same as we have right now, but if there are amendments or edits to it, that it continues to support the agri-food sector here in Canada and in the United States.
Those are the very fair warnings. I think you might recall in the 2018 renegotiation, Mexico and the U.S. basically defined the deal and then brought it to Canada as a bit of a take it or leave it at the end. Do you think that also is a risk this time, given the dynamic that we see?
I think it could be a risk. It depends what we see with CUSMA. But what I've heard from interlocutors in Washington, D.C. and the U.S. is that there's no appetite from the administration to bring the agreement to Congress. They don't have the votes from even their own party in the House or on the Senate side. And so when we look at potential updates or amendments to the agreement, very much we're looking at side letters on key issues. The key issues, obviously, we hear about in the media and every day is dairy, aluminum, lumber, et cetera. But in terms of the fundamental agreement that we have between our three countries, I hear very positive messaging from our friends in the U.S.
That's very encouraging. So would it also be your position or testimony that a resolution or a successful renegotiation of CUSMA is in Canada's best interest generally?
Yes, absolutely.
All right, that's good. If I can just flip to Mercosur for a second, because you had a couple good exchanges. Recognizing that any deal that Canada would do with another country would be could be viewed by the United States in a particular light. Not that would prevent us from doing any free trade deals. Our position is we should be expanding trade with other countries. But do we have to be mindful about how we might structure a deal with Mercosur so as to not potentially create additional frictions with the U.S. at a very crucial moment?
Look, us at the Meat Council, we are the most pro-free trade folks you'll find around. But as you folks know, all around the committee table, any free trade agreement we sign, or most of them we sign, have TRQs, or they have some elements to them that aren't free and unfeathered access. That's what the Brazilians and Argentinians are asking for, is full unfeathered access to Canada. That would absolutely have a major impact on our beef sector here in Canada. Yeah, there are definitely concerns that we've heard from our American counterparts of a backdoor treatment for imports through Canada into the United States. I can tell you that the beef processing sector and ranchers in the U.S. are very sensitive to imports coming in from places like Brazil and Argentina. We saw that happen over the past few months, where Trump had to backtrack on some of the moves that we did. The last piece I'll say that I haven't mentioned yet is we need to also ensure that our SPS, our sanitary and phytosanitary, and our inspection systems are equivalent with the folks in Mercosur. And I would just note to the committee that the last time we did audits of the establishments in the Mercosur countries was in 2018 in Brazil and 2015 in Argentina. So we need to ensure that our CFIA inspectors are getting out there and inspecting these establishments that are currently exporting to Canada, to ensure that they are at the same level of our food standards.
Thank you, Mr. Larkin.
Thank you, Mr. Napke, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you very much, Chair. I'm going to ask maybe one or two questions and then share my time with Ms. Khalid for some follow-ups. Mr. Larkin, thank you very much. I'm really grateful for you to share this information. We've been very privileged in this committee to have members from the pork community, from beef, presenting, so the views are fairly consistent, and that's good to know. You and I were having an offline conversation earlier about the opportunities that are also opening up in other parts of the world because of our efforts in trade diversification, especially in Asia, China being a big market, Southeast Asia being a big market. Can you speak to a little bit about what those opportunities looks like, and some of the challenges that the sector is also facing to really optimize those opportunities for the meat?
Yeah, thank you for the question. So in Asia, it's very interesting. We have very mature markets, and we have markets that are emerging. And in the mature bucket, we have Japan and South Korea, who are some of our largest customers for pork and beef products. Japan actually competes on a yearly basis to be our #1 customer for pork with the United States. So they're usually about $50 million or $100 million off one way or another. China obviously is a massive market for agri-food products globally in general. We were really pleased to see the reintroduction of beef access to the Chinese market a few months ago. But as all of you folks know around the table, our pork industry continues to be impacted by the 25% retaliatory tariffs on Canadian pork. So that has cost the pork processors in Canada specifically about $175 million since the imposition of those tariffs. Market diversification is not something new to the sector, and there are great opportunities in places like Thailand, Indonesia, the Philippines. There's growing markets there, and there's growing exports. We do have challenges with countries like Indonesia and Malaysia that have high halal requirements. We do have halal certifying bodies here in Canada who have then been certified by the Indonesian authorities, for example, but we're continuing to deal with, call them non-tariff barriers, and actually being able to export our halal beef to Indonesia, where we were just approved for export a few months ago. So that's a major potential market. We just have to get past these non-tariff barriers that we're currently dealing with.
So that's very interesting, because part of the effort through these agreements is to actually get rid of these non-tariff barriers. So I look forward to working with you on, because I think the halal certification piece is something that could be easily resolved, given that our certification aligns with their certification process. So I appreciate that comment. I'll pass the microphone to Ms. Khalid.
Thank you very much, and it's a great segue with MP Naqvi's line of questioning. You know, you, Mr. Larkin, represent 90% of all the meat processing in Canada. You deliver to over 90 different markets across the world as well, not just domestic. And so when we are in that process of negotiating different trade agreements with different countries, how does your membership work with the different communities to make sure that we are not just contextually compliant, but also, living up to the standards and finding and providing trade in those new markets. And I give the example of Australia and New Zealand, just picking up on Mr. Naqvi's point on the halal certification process, where they have now been able to tap the markets, not just in beef, but also in lamb, in the Middle East, in a lot of the Asia Pacific regions, and even in Canada, where there are some consumers that do purchase frozen beef and lamb from Australia and New Zealand here to complete our markets. So I would love to know, what is that process of research and development, of innovation, to make sure that we are living up to providing that delivery to the markets that we're negotiating contracts with?
Very good question. I don't think I have enough time to answer the entire question, but I would highlight two pieces for you. One is we have the Indo-Pacific Agriculture and Agri-Food Office based in Manila, Philippines, established in 2024 with a 5-year mandate and a 5-year funding bucket. Our ask to the Government of Canada is to make that office permanent and grow on its success. So you mentioned the Australians, you mentioned the New Zealanders, I would also mention the Americans. All three countries have had regulatory officials in all of these fast-growing Indo-Pacific markets for quite some time. For example, there's USDA officials, U.S. Department of Agriculture officials in every single market for a few years now. We just have regulatory officials in Manila, Philippines, whose mandate is the entire Indo-Pacific. So we need to make the funding permanent in Manila, and we need to grow on that success. We need more regulatory folks in the Indo-Pacific to help us. The second piece I would say is the Canadian Meat Council actually coordinates foreign audits to Canada on a yearly basis. So, for example, we just had the Dominican Republic here a few weeks ago. We'll have Japan coming up in a few months. And these foreign regulatory officials come to Canada, inspect our establishment so that we can continue exporting or even start exporting to their country. So there's a lot of work done on the international stage, and always working hand in hand with our officials at Global Affairs, the CFIA, and AFC.
Thank you very much.
Madame la Présidente, est-ce que je peux avoir une... Oui, en fait, j'aimerais clarifier une situation avec
Madam
M.
Chair,
Larkin.
I would like to clarify something. Mr. Larkin, I just got back from our trip to Brazil and Argentina. And earlier, you made a reference to 2018, where the sanitary regulations, which have to be verified by Health Canada, it was not done correctly. And that's not what we're hearing in Brazil and Argentina. We are hearing that the rules are applied and they're followed here in Canada.
Thank you, Chair. Look, I just looked at the information yesterday on the CFIA's website, and the last time we had our CFIA inspectors physically go to Brazil was in 2018, and physically go to Argentina in 2015. They were physically in Paraguay and Uruguay, I believe, as 2022. But the largest beef exporters, or one of the largest beef exporters in the world is Brazil, followed pretty closely by Argentina. Our message is to ensure that we have an inspection equivalency, because our companies here in Canada spend millions of dollars a year to ensure that they're CFIA compliant for a good reason. But we need to ensure that the folks importing into Canada are also CFIA compliant.
Ils ont assuré qu'ils respectaient les règles canadiennes là-bas.
Absolutely. One of the things that committee members did was talk beef all the time and reiterate CFIA's regulations and so on and so forth. So rest assured, from the committee's end, and I know from the PS's when he does this, those issues were raised a lot to make sure that they understand that we expect CFIA quality. So thank you all. Thank you all very much for your information. We go together on these issues, and we'll see how we do this year. We're excited about moving forward on this CUSMA review, and we hope that we'll be able to solve all of the problems that are ahead. I will suspend for a moment until our other witnesses come to the table. Thank you. Much pursuant to Standing Order 1082 and the motion adopted by the committee on Tuesday, May 5th, 2026, the committee is commencing its study of international trade-related activities of certain federal entities. And we have with us today from the Canadian Commercial Corporation, Robert Kwan, President and Chief Executive Officer, and from Invest in Canada, Laurel Broughton, Chief Executive Officer. Welcome very much to both of you. My apologies that we are starting a few minutes late, but we will try and catch up. Welcome to you all. Ms. Broughton, if you would like to give opening remarks of up to 5 minutes, please.
Good afternoon, Madam Chair. Thank you, and members of the committee. Thank you for the invitation to appear today. It's a pleasure to join you to discuss the role Invest in Canada plays within Canada's trade portfolio and the importance of global investment as a driver of trade, growth, and competitiveness. Je vous remercie de me donner l'occasion de participer
Thank you for this opportunity to participate in your study today.
De promouvoir, d'attirer et de faciliter des investissements directs étrangers pour accroître la
Invest in Canada's mandate is to promote, attract, and facilitate foreign direct investment to support economic prosperity and drive across the country.
And outreach campaigns in target markets, and by serving as a single window entry point for global investors pursuing large-scale transformational investments in key sectors. Invest in Canada focuses on attracting new greenfield investments and large-scale capital. We also support global companies with existing Canadian footprints to make significant reinvestments and to expand or diversify their Canadian operations. Invest in Canada provides a concierge-style service to global investors through dedicated relationship and account management. We work closely with federal, provincial, and territorial partners, including the Trade Commissioner Service and in-market partners, to deliver a coordinated and competitive Canadian value proposition and to provide seamless end-to-end service and support. Nous sommes fiers de donner à nos partenaires un accès.
We are proud to provide partners with access to our bespoke intelligence and data portal so that they have the necessary tools to inform their investment attraction activities.
Partners share a consistent narrative and data set with all international investors regardless of the point of interaction. As part of Canada's international trade ecosystem, Invest in Canada plays a distinct and complementary role within the portfolio by focusing exclusively on the attraction and facilitation of global investment. This work supports trade by attracting international investors whose capital, technology, and networks will help Canadian firms integrate into global value chains and expand exports, or who in turn become global exporters from Canada themselves. In this way, investment attraction is a key enabler of trade growth. As global trade and investment relationships evolve, diversification is becoming increasingly important, with major investors seeking resilient and balanced portfolios. In this context, Canada stands out as a reliable partner with a strong and distinct value proposition that resonates with global investors. Canada offers economic stability, rule of law, a predictable and increasingly streamlined regulatory framework, an educated workforce, deep natural resource endowments, the best tax treatment for new business investments in the G7, and access to 1.5 billion consumers across 16 free trade agreements, representing 2/3 of global GDP. Les secteurs prioritaires qui nous intéressent sont les mêmes que ceux auxquels
The major sectors that interest us are those that have a strong export potential. These include advanced manufacturing, critical minerals, and other natural resources, value-added agriculture, and energy, which solidifies the connection between trade and investment.
By global companies that will drive long-term economic growth in Canada, as well as export from Canada. The first is a large European energy company which recently invested in a Quebec-based critical minerals company. This project represents approximately US $630 million in capital expenditure and has been described as essential for Canada's defense and economic security, positioning the country as a reliable domestic supplier of battery materials for the global energy transition. The second is a recent Japanese investment in a manufacturing facility focused on producing electric vehicle battery tray enclosures. The new facility is expected to create approximately 1,000 direct jobs and is fast becoming a key part of the local ecosystem. As always, a Team Canada approach was key to these investment attraction successes. Despite Canada's achievements, it is crucial to highlight that global competition for investment is fierce. As investors evaluate the entire Canadian ecosystem, including talent, energy, infrastructure, regulatory environment, and access to supply chains, a coordinated approach is an increasingly robust Canadian value proposition will always be essential. Let me conclude with this. Investment is a win-win. Canada offers what global investors are seeking, and attracting strategic global investments will continue to enhance Canada's integration into global markets, strengthen economic resilience, support sustainable long-term growth, and drive increased export well into the future. Thank you very much. I look forward to answering your questions.
Thank you very much. Mr. Kwan.
Good afternoon, everyone. Madam Chair and honorable members of the committee. Thank you for the opportunity to appear before you today. In today's global environment, marked by geopolitical realignment and ongoing disruption across critical supply chains, countries are actively seeking trusted, reliable partners. This creates a clear opportunity for Canada to lead. For 80 years, the Canadian Commercial Corporation has supported Canadian exporters and strengthened bilateral trade relationships through our government-to-government contracting model. With our expertise in international government procurement and contract negotiations, CCC plays a unique role in the Government of Canada. We work alongside EDC's financing and insurance, as well as Global Affairs Network, to support Canadian exporters selling to governments abroad. We provide support to Canadian exporters from the beginning of their contract journey to the end by helping them navigate complex markets, by streamlining contract administration, and by working closely with both Canadian exporters and foreign government buyers to address and mitigate risks. Our contracts are backed by the Government of Canada, so foreign government buyers can trust that they will be delivered as agreed upon. What we do translates into real economic benefits for Canada. Over the past 5 years, CCC has signed $17 billion in export contracts for Canadian exporters, with more than $4 billion signed just last year alone. In addition to these signed contracts, we are actively managing a contract portfolio with a value of about $10 billion. We expect these exports to sustain more than 41,000 jobs in Canada over the next 5 years. CCC operates through 3 business lines. First is Defense Production Sharing Agreement. Our key public policy mandate is administrating this DPSA agreement on behalf of the Government of Canada. This defense trade agreement enshrines Canada as part of the U.S. domestic military supply base, which enables Canadian exporters to sell goods and services to the United States Department of Defense on equal footing with their U.S.-based competitors. We receive a parliamentary appropriation for this business line, and services are offered free of charge to Canadian exporters. Last year, we delivered an exceptional return on our parliamentary appropriation, whereby for every dollar of the appropriation, CCC signed $139 of export contracts. Canadian defense exporters rely on this privileged access to the U.S. defense market, the largest in the world, to build capacity and to expand additional global markets. Through strategic and concerted efforts to expand our reach across branches of the U.S. Department of Defense, the DPSA has seen a 22% compound annual growth rate over the past 5 years, with opportunities for Canadian exporters in sectors as diverse as food and medical supplies to construction supplies and even snow plows. Our second business line is referred to as the International Prime Contracting, or IPC. As Canada advances its trade diversification, CCC is uniquely positioned to help Canadian exporters navigate uncertainty and capture high-value global opportunities through our IPC business line. It's a key driver of export diversification and growth. It's an important tool to support Canada's goal to double non-U.S. trade by 2035. IPC enables government-to-government contracting in sectors of national importance such as aerospace, nuclear, agriculture, and defense.
If you could complete your presentation, Mr. Kwan, we're just running over time.
I'll conclude by just highlighting one key example whereby CCC exemplifies the work in supporting diversifying Canada's trade. Last year, after more than 5 years of negotiations, CCC delivered a truly historic contract that strengthened Canada-EU ties and brings back an iconic Canadian aircraft. We signed a contract with 6 EU countries for the sale of 22 Canadian-built amphibious firefighting aircraft from de Havilland, Canada. And that will lead to 500 jobs directly, as well as more than 3,000 jobs throughout its supply chain. CCC was involved from the very beginning of this very complicated contract, and we're very pleased to support this important Canadian exporter. So in closing, honorable members, in an increasingly uncertain world, Canada's reputation as a trusted partner is one of our greatest competitive advantages. CCC exists to turn that reputation into results for Canadian businesses, for Canadian workers, and for the Canadian economy. Thank you.
Thank you. Thank you both very much. Mr. Mantle for 6 minutes, please.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you to our witnesses for appearing and providing the committee valuable testimony. My questions will be to Ms. Broughton. I'm going to ask you a few questions about your most recent report. You called it, quote, the best performance in a decade. Is that correct? Yes?
Yes. And are you speaking to the 2024 report?
Yes, your most recent report. Okay. You said you focused on new greenfield investment. Could you tell me what percentage of FDI into Canada was new greenfield investment, expansions of productive capacity, or additions of machinery, equipment, and IP?
So our focus on Investing Canada is on the largest, most transformative investments. So on the greenfield investment side, we would work with areas of priority for the federal government. So I'll give you an example of that. For example,
I'm just looking for a breakdown, Ms. Broughton, of the FDI last year that you calculated. What percentage is the new greenfield investment?
I don't have the breakdown of the differential of the greenfield in front of me, but I think it's really important to recognize.
Thank you. What percentage of the investment was foreign entities acquiring Canadian companies?
I think that information is available. I don't have it right in front of me at this point. But I would say I think it's really important.
It's 49%, according to your own data. So by my understanding of reading your report, about half of Canada's inflows last year were the acquisition of Canadian companies by foreign companies. Does that create new capital in Canada?
So I want to distinguish for you what we work on Investing Canada. So the files that we provide the concierge service to are a certain select group of files that are really important to the federal government. The FDI report that we produce is a roll-up of all activity that's happening across the system, all of our partners, and other activity that we may not be actively engaged, but it's to provide a picture of what's happening in Canada.
Thank you, Ms.
So I want to speak to your question about.
I want to understand what you're trumpeting last year as the best success in a decade. I'm trying to unpack that and see really where there is success or not.
So why don't we talk?
I see 49% is non-new capital creation. Less than a quarter was new greenfield investment. Let's talk about productivity.
Can I just talk to you about one
I'm
very
sorry, I'm going to
prominent?
continue on my questions. I have limited time, Ms. Broughton.
Can I just talk about a really important M&A
Broughton,
file?
hold on. You'll have us. Members have a limited amount of time, and they want to get their questions.
Sure.
So, if we can continue, please.
Thank you. I'm going to go on to productivity. A famous economist said productivity isn't everything, but in the long run, it's almost everything. So, adjusted for inflation and growth in the labor force, is business investment in non-residential capital up or down in the last decade?
The key is driven by FDI. There's a great number of statistics with respect to
Absolutely.
that.
So is it up or down in the last decade?
We see it in the work that we do on the files that we work on when you see the impact of the productivity drivers of the technology enhancements that are brought in by some of the major global players like a Siemens or a K+S or those products. So the files that we work on absolutely are driving productivity.
Right. So is it up or down?
Productivity across the country has remained somewhat stagnant. I recognize that fact.
It's actually down.
But the files that we are working on,
it's down
we are
in the last
confident
decade.
it's driving the productivity up.
So given that Canada's non-residential capital is down in the last decade, where does Canada rank among our G7 for productivity-producing investment?
Canada does very well with respect to the ranking on the FDI side. And that's my responsibility on what's happening with respect to FDI. We are ranking, the Carney Ranking Index this year puts Canada second in the Confidence Index. The dollars that are coming into the country are increasing year over year in terms of the percentage. And I know that this committee is about trade diversification.
Thank you.
And I think it's really key to recognize
you've tried to
there's
answer
diversification
I want to get back to my question,
of
Ms.
those who are
Broughton.
coming in as investors in the country as well.
You were saying you're focused on greenfield investment that drives productivity, and you think we have a good record in that. Well, according to RBC, in Q2 2026, Canada ranks last among G7 nations for productivity-producing investment. So it's concerning to me, the CEO of Invest Canada is trumpeting that we do well in investment, but doesn't know that we rank last in investment.
But I think it's really important to recognize we don't touch all
Let
of
me
the
ask you another
investments
question about productivity, Ms. Broughton.
that are across the country.
Chair, can I just interject for a second? We've had a very healthy tradition in this committee to be very respectful, and we all have political points to make, but letting our guests finish their sentences, and you've shown a lot of latitude to let members ask questions. So I just ask Mr. Mantle to just show the same respect we've always done in this committee, because it works really well. Thank you.
I'm going to respond to that, Madam Chair, because I disagree with the members' view that I'm being disrespectful. I think that's unfair. I'm asking questions that the witness clearly has no answers to, and if she doesn't have the answers to them, then I will give her the answer, and then we'll move on to the next question.
Well, Chair, interrupting somebody in mid-sentence does not help, so letting them finish the sentence.
I'm not going to let a witness drag out the time because they don't know the answer and filibuster the answer to the question.
Okay, but I don't think that's fair to make that assumption that the witness isn't giving you. She's trying to give you the best information that she has in front of her. Any information that you are requesting that she doesn't have with her, we would appreciate it if you would supply it to the committee following the meeting today. All right, let's go back and let's just have a nice, cool meeting here and everybody be respectful. You want to get your answers, but get them in a respectful manner, and the witness will give them to you in the best ability she can today in front of the meeting. So I had stopped the clock, so I'm resuming the clock back.
Okay, another question on productivity. Has investment in new capital been at a rate that outpaces the rate at which capital wears out or becomes obsolete in Canada? So said another way, is capital stock per worker increasing or decreasing over the last decade?
The questions that you're asking me, Member Mantle, I would like to be able to, these are not the focus of the data set that we collect. We collect the FDI data across the country. In 2025, for example, second highest in FDI inflows for the country, 883 projects announced, 44,000 jobs created, 1.5 trillion in total FDI stock. That is the data set that we utilize to report on what's happening across the country. What we work on Invest in Canada specifically are a key number of projects that are very targeted.
Let's take the headline number, FDI. Over the last decade, what was Canada's net inflow or outflow of FDI?
Canada has been, if you focus, for example, on the United States, Canadians invest more in the United States than comes into Canada from the U.S. That is true.
So would it surprise you to hear from RBC's report Q2 2026, $1 trillion outflow in the last decade?
It does not surprise me.
So then given all of that, decreasing productivity, decreasing capital inflows, less capital per worker, and a net outflow of $1 trillion over the last decade, do you stand by your statement that we're having the best performance in a decade?
My focus is incoming FDI. I know that you're taking a calibration of what's happening in the country with respect to outflow of FDI and inflow of FDI. What I would say to you is the work that we are currently doing collectively across the country to ensure that Canada is investable. We are hearing from global investors, many of them who are Canadian investors, about this is a time where they are very focused on seeing more investment in Canada. That's the work that we're doing with both the global providers, but that is a conversation that we've been having across the country for many years right now with respect to Canadian investment globally, which is important. It is important to be connected globally, but we are seeing, I'll just give you an example, South Korea over the last 10 years, 479% increased investment into Canada. Australia, 210% increase. Japan, 42% increase. So we are seeing those global investors increasingly invest in Canada.
Why don't the numbers match up then?
I'm sorry, Mr. Mandel, we're a minute and something over time here. Thank you both for doing what you do. Mr. Nafke, please.
Thank you very much, Chair. Welcome to both the witnesses. Thank you for the work both of you and your respective organizations doing. You alluded to this, as you know, that the Prime Minister and the government have set some really ambitious targets in terms of trade diversification, especially as it relates to the non-U.S. Markets. And CCC and Invest in Canada are very much part of that effort, and you've been given some specific instructions in that regards. Maybe Mr. Kyon, I'll start with you, and later, Ms. Broughton, same question for you. Is since that strategy has been outlined, what kind of tactics and tools are you using to really meet the goal of doubling our non-U.S. exports and your engagement both within Canada and abroad in that regards?
Thank you very much for that question. CCC has been doing this government to government, like I said earlier, over about 80 years. And we're applying our very unique Canadian GDG construct in terms of the way the contracts are structured to allow our Canadian exporters to participate to a greater degree in accessing the foreign government procurement markets. And one of the greatest features that CCC provides in this business model is that we, through as a prime contractor, we assure the performance of the contractor, thereby reducing the procurement risk for the foreign buyer. Now, with that as context, to answer your question, Mr. Nafke, we've done a number of things recently that has been highly effective. So this whole of government approach that we're doing with not only Invest Canada, EDC, Trade Commissioner Services, and certainly the many heads of missions throughout the world where we pursue opportunities. It's been a very coordinated effort, and it's getting better, not to suggest it is perfect, but certainly we are showing up, we Canada are showing up more as Team Canada, providing not just a transactional set of discussions, but providing actually solutions, capabilities, and a longer-term sort of economic cooperation development type of ideas. And those have resulted in some very concrete examples. For example, I mentioned in my speech very quickly the Rescue, the firefighting aircraft from de Havilland. That's one. Two, last year we signed a contract that was north of $1 billion with German Navy. We're taking Lockheed Martin Canada as well as the Royal Canadian Navy IP for a combat management system that Germany is acquiring from Canada, and they're trying to standardize that across their frigate class. They're going to start with one existing class, and their vision is to extend it to 2 or 3 additional fleets, and that's going to last well over 25 years, creating hundreds of jobs throughout Canada, but mainly in Atlantic Canada. And that's just another example where we're not getting into a simple transaction, but truly looking for a win-win between the two countries. That's one example. Another one I'll give you quickly is in Bangladesh, in our very critical agricultural sector. We've been, through CCC, through this government-to-government mechanism, we've been supplying the Bangladesh Agricultural Development Corporation with potash from Campotex. And we've been doing that for the last dozen years. We just entered our 12th contract, and over those many years, we've delivered from Canada over 4 million metric tons of this very critical mineral that is vital to many countries, but certainly in Bangladesh, where agriculture is such an essential part of their economy.
Great, thank you. Ms. Broughton, same question, and specific examples are very important because it just focuses the mind.
Sure. When we talk about the connectivity of investment attraction to trade diversification, I can use an example, sticking maybe with potash, of K plus S, a German company who has invested $3 billion in Saskatchewan, in Bethune, Saskatchewan, and that potash is being exported around the world. You think about Roquette in Portage la Prairie, Manitoba, as an example. They have come in. They are the largest pea protein plant. And that, again, is being exported, 125,000 tons of yellow peas coming in. So it integrally connected to export are the global players that come into Canada, help us scale our operations, and then export globally. Another one would be High Life Pork from Thailand. Have come into Manitoba as well. And then that product is in markets that they were familiar with. The work that's happening with respect to investment attraction, maybe if I can just tie back to some of the questions that were being asked, if you go through a facility of a modern manufacturer, some of the players like LG Nexstar that we've been privileged to work with, it will be the most modern, efficient, productive facility that you will see. Our goal at Invest in Canada is to increase our productivity capacity in Canada by bringing in these globally connected modern players that bring the new technology and innovations to Canada. So that's an example of some of the work that we do to drive that.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Deschênes for 6 minutes.
Merci beaucoup, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you very much, Madam Chair. And good day, Ms. Breton. We're talking about sources of foreign direct investment and how to diversify those sources. In 2024, you published a report, and we see in it that the United States represent 45% of FDI. Has that changed recently? We are almost ready to give our update for 2025, but we continue to see that the United States remain a very important source of FDI. Here's what I explained to my team about the topic. The United States will never stop being important to Canada. That is for certain. But what is important is to diversify investments in Canada. And on that level, we're really starting to see growth in investments from, for example, Europe, including France, as soon as CITA was in force. We started to see investments also from Germany and other countries. And we could provide those statistics to you. We're really seeing growth in those cases. So it's mostly from Europe. From Europe, also from South Korea, Japan. We're really starting to have detailed conversations with, for example, the UAE, so other places around the world as well. And we have mechanisms to ensure, when it comes to these FDIs, that we're still protecting our intellectual property here. Isn't that right? Yes, absolutely. So, for example, we work very closely with Global Affairs Canada and with Innovation Canada in regards to the Investment Canada Act. So if another country's technology comes into our country and increases our productivity and has an impact on our economy, we are not responsible at Invest in Canada to protect technology around the world. We are responsible for attracting new technology to Canada. Isn't there a risk that that someone would get their hands on Canadian intellectual property? Well, for example, when it comes to protecting our IP around the world, it's really important for us to see that these are companies that will accept the Investment Canada Act. And in that context, it's not up to us to decide. It's to the others. It's for the others to decide, rather. So our job is to help companies, and part of that is also making them understand that they will have to have a responsibility to accept that law when it comes to their investments. So foreign businesses have to go through a certain filter. What gets checked? So the Investment Canada Act is governed by CIIT to ensure that things are good for Canada in sectors where we are comfortable receiving foreign direct investment. And what about people behind the businesses? I'm not the one who manages the process, but the process is there to protect Canada. Okay, and when it comes to your search for FDI, do you coordinate with Quebec? Oh, absolutely. We work very, very closely with Investissement Québec. Often we hold meetings conjointly around the world. We hold events here in Canada. We manage foreign visits here in Canada. We explain the federal landscape. For example, this year we held a productivity super deduction event. Quebec manages its side of that, but we are very unified in the work that we do. In Quebec, hydroelectricity is very important, and we want to move towards electrification. What are you hearing from investors on that topic? The fact that Quebec has always been a leader in sustainable electricity and hydroelectricity has really been beneficial in past years to help manage companies that wanted to have a sustainable mandate in Canada or around the world. That is of the utmost importance, and we work very closely together. You probably know that we answer to provincial requests. So if Quebec had said, no, we're not interested in that type of company, we would not bring them. We would not bring that company to Quebec. So it really is a partnership between ourselves and Investissement Québec in the work that we do together. Green energy in Quebec has always been extremely important to companies.
Your time is up. Mr. McKenzie for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and I'd like to thank both of our witnesses for their time and bringing their expertise to the committee. Mr. Kwan, you mentioned the firefighting aircraft, wildfire fighting aircraft, and de Havilland. Am I correct in understanding that those aircraft are being built in Calgary?
That is correct, sir. Majority of them are assembled there. There's, I believe, a wing piece that's coming from Victoria, but the main assembly is in Calgary.
Sir, on behalf of Calgarians and Albertans, thank you for the work of CCC in ensuring this success for that enterprise. Ms. Broughton, a long time ago, I used to work for a particular government department. Foreign direct investment was part of that government department. I know that your tenure with Invest in Canada is relatively short, but at what time did the foreign direct investment attraction exercise get rolled out of what used to be the Department of Foreign Affairs?
Invest in Canada came into existence about 8 years ago, and to have maybe we were the new kid on the block to some extent. Foreign direct investment has always been a key priority of governments across the country. But at that point, creating Invest in Canada, Canada determined we needed our own entity. We've worked very closely. I will say I grew up in Alberta, so I spent a lot of time out in Alberta as well, making sure that we worked very collaboratively with our subnational partners. Before this role and the privilege to lead Invest in Canada, I led Nova Scotia's trade and investment organization. And so we really recognized we needed that partnership with the subnational players, and I think we've really established that strongly in Alberta.
Colleague, how many people work for Invest in Canada now?
66.
66, thank you. Stats Canada has just come out and announced that in Q1 2026, so fairly fresh numbers, 17.2 billion investment outflow. Now, I think you were touching on the fact that your job is to bring it in, but at some level you must be concerned when it's going right back out the door. Indeed, over the last decade, $2 exited for every dollar that came in. What problem do we have that has to be fixed in order to change that?
So I have a chance to answering the questions of your colleagues to talk about our responsibility is that FDI inflow. FDI inflow is tied to our regulatory environment, our processes in Canada. I speak to investors every day who are very excited about what is taking place in Canada with respect to streamlining investments, tackling taxation issues with the new productivity superdeduct. All of those things, although my responsibility is not on the outflow, I think we could assume that those improvements to regulatory structures and others will also impact our own Canadian investors who look around the world as well.
So in some ways, you're a little bit like a waiter who's got to sell the steak or sell the fish of the day. And so I have to believe that when you and your team are speaking to foreign partners who might be looking for investment opportunities around the globe and considering Canada as one possible destination, that from time to time you get some rather specific feedback on why they may not choose Canada. So can you be more specific? I might suggest to you that it's my view there's a bit of a regulatory challenge in Canada, but can you give some examples to this committee as to what you've heard directly from potential investors in Canada?
Well, I think it's really important to recognize that we do need to get things built in Canada, and we are seeing action by this government. I am hearing from clients around the world that that is really important to them, that we need to streamline regulation. I myself was in a provincial government, have done a lot of regulatory reform. We can't have processes that sit upon processes. And so the work to streamline regulatory improvements. Investors, companies are not opposed to being good citizens and adhering to regulation, but they want to understand, how do I get from point A to point B, and how long is it going to take, and how many steps will there be? So all of the efforts that are being made to streamline that are really improving our value proposition that we are able to speak to investors around the world about.
Thank you very much, Mr. McKenzie. I'm sorry, I have to keep everybody really tight. You've got 24 seconds remaining.
Thank you. The Major Projects Office doesn't fix some of the significant regulatory problems we have. It creates an express lane around the problems. Have you gotten that feedback? There's no certainty in a Major Projects Office. One's got to go on bended knee, ask for permission, as opposed to knowing the rules and the framework from the outset. It sounds to me like the feedback you've gotten is that investors would rather know the framework ahead of time.
Investors do want to know the framework, and they want to understand the pathway, but they are also very pleased with the establishment of the Major Projects Office and what positive impacts that will have.
Mr. Fonseca, please, for 5 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair, and thank you, Ms. Broughton, Mr. Kwan. I will continue on that line of questioning. You know, we are hyper-focused on building a one Canada economy. So what does that mean? That means when an investor is looking to Canada, it is seamless. It is a one-stop shop. They're able to invest, and we have some ambitious goals. You know, we're talking $1 trillion over the next 5 years of foreign direct investment. Today, I'll say the person that champions Canada best is our Prime Minister. Mark Carney is in New York City. In September, he will be meeting with 100 of the largest or maybe the largest sovereign and wealth funds, pension funds, et cetera, from around the world in Toronto. To look to bring in that investment. And of course, with the work that both of you do, that helps in terms of getting us to that ambitious goal. MP McKenzie was talking about some of the challenges we have domestically. Now, you have had the opportunity to head up investment for Nova Scotia. You've lived in Alberta. I know you were a cabinet minister in Ontario, and now you are here at Invest Canada, Ms. Broughton. So I'm going to ask you, so when you speak to our provincial counterparts, and we talk about the one economy, like I could tell you, the federal government has gotten rid of the 53 barriers that were in front of this one Canada economy. But we are working hard to be able to address the barriers that still exist between provinces and even down to the municipal level with all the regulatory regime, et cetera, which I'm sure many of those that are looking to invest in Canada bring up. Can you tell me what your strategy is, what you've done, how you've addressed this with the provincial counterparts?
It's very important work that is being done, and I can tell you that we are feeling it, and businesses are seeing it, that there is a streamlining of regulatory approvals, that there is a willingness. I can tell you, I was talking about the partnership we have with Quebec, the partnership we have with every province. There really is a Canadian desire to improve our realities and still have strong standards, but to make those efficient changes in a way that I don't think we've seen before across the country. And so that work is crucial. Businesses are seeing it. You don't have to take my word for it. I think the best indication is that we ranked number 2 globally in FDI confidence this year. That is a global assessment of how executives view a country and whether they are confident in investing there. I think number 2 is a very good spot for Canada, and we've gone up in terms of that percentage.
Yeah, so we have a very strong brand right now. You know, you look at our workforce, rule of law, trade agreements that we have around the world, and how to capitalize on this at this time and bringing in that investment. Is that something that you also capitalize on, Mr. Kwan, when you go out to market?
Absolutely, sir. I mean, this is, what we're trying to do as Team Canada, and certainly Laurel plays a very important role, as we do, along with other partners in the trade portfolio, and it's to create that virtuous circle. So in the case of FDI, Laurel and I've had these chats where, as we're attracting investments into this country to create economic activity, it would make sense in certain sectors where CCC plays and is good at in terms of government to government, to impart that knowledge and the capabilities from day one, so that even as part of the investment strategy and the business case the foreign investors are making, they would understand immediately that upon success on the ground here in Canada domestically, eventually they'll have to export to international markets. And having that knowledge and knowing that there's a capable path gives them greater confidence.
On that, and just quickly, so all politics are local, and we speak with local businesses, small, medium-sized enterprises, also large enterprises, all the time. And I have to say, I have never referred one of those businesses to either of you, because I don't know where that portal is, how to get to you, what you can do for them. And so I would like more information to be able to deliver to the riding of Mississauga East Cooksville. I know we have other Mississauga members here, Ikra Khalid and others from across Ontario and across Canada, Quebec, etc. So we want to have that information so that we can, because I'm asking, proactively, do you go to find businesses that will fit that niche, will fit that gap that you see, that you can then take into to look at contracts for those businesses, or do they have to come finding you? Because I don't think they'll be able to do that.
I'm not sure there's sufficient time for that answer. I'm going to ask you very briefly, but if you could also send to the committee some additional information on both companies, please. So just a brief answer, if possible, to Mr. Fonseca.
The answer is yes, both directions. So we actually actively seek, focusing on SMEs. Last year alone, we supported over 800. 69% of that number is SMEs. And I could cite a couple of very, specific examples. In Mississauga base, Wooksley, a small manufacturer led by women. It's about camouflage uniforms. CCC, just as a very quick side note, we actively partner with the Department of National Defense, D&D, in the support of military donations to Ukraine.
Okay.
In the background, we are the procurement agency.
Thank you very much. On to Mr. Shin for 2.5 minutes, please.
Merci, Madame la Présidente.
Thank you, Madam Chair. This morning we were reading that Dominique Leblanc will travel to the United States to negotiate renewing CUSMA. Here's my question for both of you. How much is the uncertainty stopping you from attracting investments when it comes to negotiations? Uncertainty is absolutely something that is not good for investments, but at this time, here's what I can tell you. Starting in 2025, we began to notice more companies keeping an eye on investing in Canada. We will still see a significant increase in foreign investment this year, according to Statistics Canada. So continuity and predictability is increasing as well. Our Canadian products go to the United States and theirs come here, and it's certain that the United States will always be important for us, but it is also important for us to diversify to other countries, and that's what we're working on. But we still work on companies from the States who want to invest here. And do you sometimes have foreign investors who decide to invest in the States instead of in Canada for fear of tariffs? They will decide to come to Canada in certain sectors, that's certain. But are some of them deciding to invest in the States because they're concerned about tariffs? Uncertainty is absolutely something that we need to manage with companies, but we are attempting to diversify. We're trying to attract companies who want to invest in Canada for all that we have in Canada, our natural resources, and these companies want to come to Canada no matter where they work, and there might be a lot of noise around the renegotiations.
Mr. Chambers for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Mr. Kwan, are there any regions, countries of the world that you do not operate in?
At the moment, we are less active in Africa in general.
Okay.
And certainly some of the countries where, for a host of different factors, where it's both economically, politically unstable, certainly is an area that we don't typically look to, just because we're trying to manage risk on behalf of the Canadian exporters.
And are you involved in China?
No, we're not.
You're not involved in China for some of the reasons you just noted, political risk, reputational risk?
At the moment, we have no transactions, no contracts in China, and nothing in the foreseeable future.
Okay, thank you. Ms. Broughton, if you're back at committee a year from now, how do we know what success looks like for your organization? How do you measure success?
We measure success by the projects that we work on that land in Canada. We measure success by the entire ecosystem. That's why we talk about FDI. So, for example, your colleague was asking questions. Canada has the highest FDI flows per capita in the G7. That's a good measure for us to look at again next year. Canada is ranked #1 global for global competitiveness among G7 countries. So we look at what the OECD says, we look at what the IMD says, we look at what Statistics Canada says, and we look at our own data set to determine what is our success in Canada.
And so that's due to your organization's existence? Is that?
So we work on our own files with our concierge service. We provide knowledge across the country to every agency that does this work and the data sets that we provide. So in that way, we lever the work that we do across the country. Is every file touched on by us? No. But I think we provide that single source of portal entry, both on the greenfield, resolving issues that prevent, even after final investment decision of something to get built, and we are working now extensively on capital attraction as well.
Shouldn't you have like one metric that your organization is measured by so that we know whether it's successful and worth having 60 FTEs? You know, like if you're going to take credit for like large macro numbers, like how are you measuring your organization?
So we have a departmental results framework like every other organization. We measure based on the number of transactions. We measure based on the marketing touch that we have. We measure on the products that we provide across the country.
My apologies. I'm going to be cut off by the chair here shortly. Shouldn't it just be on greenfield FDI? Like, is that not really what we're trying to get at here?
But we do greenfield FDI, we do reinvestment FDI, we do capital attraction FDI. It is really what's happening across the country in the bulk of the measures.
My final question. You're familiar with the Ericsson deal from a couple of years ago, November 2024? Much fanfare by the government. Who owns the IP? Do you know who owns the IP that's produced in that facility?
I think that was my first event as CEO of Invest in Canada.
Yes.
So I don't
who owns the IP?
Of all the details of that. My understanding is it would be Ericsson.
Oh, that's right. So we used Canadian taxpayer dollars to lure a foreign company here to build capacity but the IP isn't actually owned by Canada.
And create jobs that Canadians go to work every day.
Okay, I mean, look, I think there's a reasonable debate to be
pay
had
taxes.
whether I believe there's a reasonable debate to be had whether we should be supporting Canadian firms that build here, that keep intellectual property here, instead of cheering on kind of the hollowing out of Canadian corporate Canada, which you're doing here today. And producing IP for other foreign entities.
Listen, I won't disagree with you that we
Ms.
should build
Broughton,
up
I
our
don't
own
have
IP.
time.
That's not the work that we do at Invest in Canada.
Thank you very much.
Thank you.
Ms. Lapointe for 4 minutes.
Thank you, Madam Chair. Thank you very much for being with us. This is very interesting. Earlier, my colleague asked a question. And you were saying that you collaborate closely with global affairs, etc. Can you speak more to that? How do you work together with both of them? Inaudible for the interpreter.
Global affairs.
Ah, OK, merci. Puis Monsieur Kwan.
Okay, thank you. And Mr. Kwan, earlier, Ms. Broughton said she had 66 individuals on her team. How many individuals are part of your organization?
Our organization is 128 employees, and most of them are based here in Ottawa, and some of our business development folks are more remote, traveling.
OK, merci. Vous avez dit un peu plus tôt qu'il y a...
Okay, thank you. Earlier, regarding your travels, you said you're not going to China. You said there's not much investment in China. We did, in Africa, rather. We did a study in Africa here, and I understand that there are 54 countries in Africa, but are there any of these that you are looking to who might be able to contribute to helping us have better relations with Africa?
We have a number of sources that we look to constantly to get market intel. Of course, we go through the full network of global affairs and all the mission heads, the Trade Commissioner Services, and now with all the heightened interest in defense and security, certainly the Defense Attaché Network. So we're all plugged in there. Over and above that, we speak to Canadian exporters extensively. And as much as I characterize that Africa is not the primary priority at the moment, we are actively pursuing still a few transactions. I'll give you one very specific one. There's a company called SGL, I think Sanders Geophysics. It's a surveying company, Canadian, and they're doing some surveying work in Cote d'Ivoire and Tanzania to look at energy mining. And that's a concrete example that it's not a contract, but we're just in the early stages of exploring. So where it makes sense with Canadian capabilities, we are on the ground there. Morocco, we have de Havilland aircrafts that we're refurbishing and selling. So, and in the past, we've helped build even soccer stadiums in Cameroon. So we are active in that continent when it makes sense. At this very moment, it's a little bit lighter, again, very openly. But like I said, this one particular Canadian export that I just cited is just a concrete example in Morocco.
OK. Oui. On revient d'un voyage en Argentine.
We just came back from a trip to Brazil and Argentina, and here's what we heard very often, that they would like to have Canadian investments, mainly in the mining sector, but also when it comes to all of our agriculture equipment. Of course, they want our potash, believe you me. So have you accompanied Canadian businesses to see how they do want our investments in the mining sector?
Not specifically the mining sector, but I accompany Minister Sidhu and formerly Minister Ng on virtually every single trade mission, including earlier this year, we're in the Middle East. I think in June, third week of June, we'll be in Japan, and I'll be there again. This will be probably my third trip there. So we are very active, and I personally travel way too much in terms of both trade missions, but the work that we do, and we actually work and travel very extensively with my EDC colleagues just because of the nature of the work that we do. In February, I was with the Honorable Minister of NRCan, Hodgson, to Poland for a very, very important Team Canada effort for us to sell CANDU nuclear reactors to Poland.
Thank you very much, Mr. Kwan. I need approval for $1,500 for this study that we are currently doing. All those in favor, no objections, that passes. Thank you very much for your witnesses. Please send the committee some additional information pertaining to today. That would be appreciated. Meeting adjourned.